what's up guys? Today I'm going to answer some questions that people have been asking for quite a while, and I'm just going to tell my story of what it was like to major in linguistics at university. I studied linguistics for 3 years from 2016 to 2019, and in this video I just want to talk about three major steps in that process. First of all was how I decided to major in linguistics. Second of all, what it was like when I was actually at the university studying and taking classes in linguistics. And third of all, what happened after I graduated, and what career prospects there are for linguists. So all I can do is talk about my personal experience and maybe the experiences of my friends. And yeah, so I'll just start. I'm going to start from the beginning. Before I made any decision to study linguistics, before this was even on my radar or before I was even thinking about it, I knew I was interested in languages. Even from pretty early age, probably middle school, 14 years old or so, I started learning Spanish in middle school when I was in 8th grade. I studied Spanish throughout middle school and high school, and I started really seeing how you can kind of apply some of the same concepts from Spanish and Spanish grammar to English. And honestly, studying Spanish did help me better understand the English language. And that was my first step into understanding linguistics. And that was really interesting. So interesting that I decided to, while I was in high school, I started learning Greek on my own. And I didn't get super far with Greek, but it was really interesting to apply the same concepts that I had learned from Spanish and from English to a third language that I was studying on my own because I wanted to. And seeing how those three languages kind of did things differently. You know, Spanish conjugates verbs, Greek more or less conjugates nouns. It's not really conjugation, but that's how I thought about it when I had only ever studied Spanish. And English doesn't really do either of those to any significant extent, but they have different ways of working around the different problems that each language needs to solve. And so that was my first kind of inkling that I was interested in languages. 2015, I moved to El Salvador, and I started learning Spanish pretty hardcore. I mean, I was really thrown into the Spanish language, like by submersion, essentially. Everything I did was in Spanish, and so I was really active about learning Spanish. I also had a ton of friends who were trying to learn English. And I had a lot of experiences that year, but there's this one moment that really just stuck in my mind. One of my friends said something along the lines of, "Hey Aaron, I was talking to anybody yesterday who said they know you." He said something along those lines. He said, I was talking to anybody yesterday. And he's a non-native English speaker, so I was like, no. Nahum, you were talking to somebody, not talking to anybody. You were talking to somebody yesterday who said they knew me. And he goes, "Well, what's the difference between somebody and anybody?" And I was like, "Oh, it's easy. Somebody, you're not talking about someone specific. And anybody, well, with anybody, it can be anybody. And with somebody, it's like a person who it could be anybody, but it's not." And as I'm explaining the logic behind the difference between somebody and anybody, I'm realizing I have no clue how to explain my own language. And that drove me on a quest to start Googling the difference between somebody and anybody. And I realized that there's a lot more that goes into the logic behind our language than what we realize. And I got fascinated. And I just decided that I wanted to start learning more about English so that I could help my friends learn Spanish. But I also, maybe there was kind of a little bit of an ego thing because I wanted to be seen as smart enough to be able to explain these logical connections between different words whenever somebody asked me. I didn't want to feel like that dummy who just couldn't explain my own language. I don't know, it's just whatever sounds right. You know, that's what people say a lot. And honestly, that's what we have to go off of. We know what sounds right and we know what sounds wrong, but we're definitely not able to explain the actual logical connections between some of the words that we use, like anybody and somebody. I started learning Esperanto, and Esperanto is fascinating if you like linguistics because it's entirely logical. There's no exceptions. It's like Legos. You're building sentences with these prefixes and suffixes, and they work together very logically, and it's just fascinating. And I started getting really interested in how that applies to other languages. And so all these things kind of came to a peak for me in 2015. And then I started researching linguistics because I wanted to learn more on this subject, and I found this book, The Art of Language Invention. And it's written by the guy who developed the fictional languages for Game of Thrones, Dothraki and High Valyrian, I believe. And he's also invented fictional languages for other TV shows. And he just goes through the process of all the linguistic details that he puts into his languages for these TV shows to make them realistic like real languages. And even though it's about fictional languages, it's actually about real languages, and it's actually about real linguistics, because he goes through and shows how everything that he does in his languages that he creates reflects something that happens in real languages. And there are things that blow your mind, especially if you only speak one language, things that you just would expect no language to do. And so I'm going to highly recommend this book. It's called The Art of Language Invention by David J. Peterson. Even if you have no interest in invented languages, or conlangs as they call them, it's still fascinating to read the thought process that this guy puts into inventing his languages to make them reflect real languages. And you will learn a lot about real languages if you read this book. So I read this. I read several other books just about linguistics in general, especially about the linguistics of English and Spanish. Spent a while studying the linguistics of Esperanto, and that is when I made my decision that I was going to study linguistics in college, because my time in El Salvador was coming to an end, and I knew I wanted to move back to America and start studying, go to college. I had the GI Bill to go to college for free, so I was like, what am I going to study? And then that brings me to the second part of my linguistics journey, which was actually going to college and starting studying linguistics. My first semester in college, so I take it back. I did my first year in college I did before I joined the Marine Corps in 2008. And so I had a long gap in between. And then my first year back to college, my first semester, I took a Linguistics 100 course. And it was not designed for linguistics majors. It was like a seminar, it was a big lecture hall. It was not designed for linguistics majors. It was just designed as kind of a general credit that anyone can take as a humanities credit. And I had a lot of friends who took this class. They were not linguistics majors, but they were like, languages are interesting. I'll try this. And then they were totally shocked by what the class was actually about, because most people don't even know what linguistics is. So in this introduction to linguistics class, we learned about phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, pragmatics, semantics, a little bit of historical linguistics, a little bit of sociolinguistics. And if you don't know what all those are, watch my Linguistics 101 video series, because I'll go into a lot more depth In fact, I'll link that up here if I remember to do that. Or I'll leave a link in the description below. What my friends realized very quickly after taking this course is that they were not just learning about how people speak. They were learning a lot about logic, a lot about set theory and categorization theory. It was a lot more like taking a math class or a logic class or a science class than it was like taking a Spanish class or a French class or an English class even. Because in all those things, you're learning how to speak, right? You're learning the grammar of a specific language. Whereas in this linguistics class, we were learning about the logic that kind of goes behind all language that you can use to understand any language. And about the anatomy of the human mouth. You learn, exactly what happens when you pronounce a B sound or a D sound or an H sound, exactly how the air is passing through, how your tongue is causing turbulence in your lips and your nasal cavity, how that all plays into it, and how we use those to create different sounds. We were learning about the logical arrangement of sounds that certain languages use. They call that phonology or phonotactics, because not every language makes use of the same sounds, right? In Spanish, they have that r sound, and you think about in Hebrew where they have that like you're spitting out phlegm or something like that. English has which very few languages do. In French, they have the e, which sounds a lot like an oo to an English speaker, but it's not. Those are two separate phonemes in French. And so we spent a lot of time learning about these logical distinctions, the way that languages logically change these around. And then we learned a lot about syntax and the way that some languages put subject and then verb and then the object. Some languages do the subject and the object and then the verb. Some languages do the verb, the subject, object. And some languages are much more free with which order you put those in. And there's reasons behind that. Some languages have prepositions, like English. Some languages have postpositions. Some languages put the adjective before the noun. Sometimes they put an adjective after the noun. And there's a lot more that just goes into this stuff than what you think. And so a lot of my friends in this Linguistics 100 course who were not linguistics majors, didn't know what they were getting themselves into, they were like, what kind of class is this? I thought we were just going to be like learning bits of Spanish and little bits of French and Russian or something like that. And I was able to help them a lot because I had read this book, specifically this book. This really helped me a lot, as well as others, and just learning little bits of linguistics from learning languages, Spanish, Esperanto, a little bit of Greek. And that was just the Linguistics 100 course. After that, I started going through more advanced linguistics courses, phonetics, phonology, syntax, sociolinguistics, and I just was fascinated with all of it. So at my university, you can take either applied linguistics or you can take general linguistics. Applied linguistics has more to do with how linguistics applies to the real world. General linguistics has a lot more to do with the theory behind the different branches of linguistics. And then we also had a tract, which was the TESOL tract, Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages. I did that along with the Applied Linguistics tract. So, by the time I graduated from university, I had a degree in Applied Linguistics with a certificate in TESOL. And that, I guess, brings me to the next part of my journey, which is, what do you do after you graduate from college with a degree in linguistics? It's hard for me to talk about that because I can talk about what I did, and I feel like maybe my path was less common for linguistics majors, because I also took the TESOL track, or I got the certificate in teaching English along with my degree. I immediately got a job teaching English. I mean, like while I was still in my last semester in college, I applied for a job teaching English in Thailand, and now I'm here. And this was honestly an excellent opportunity because it's given me practice teaching language and also practice learning language, and specifically a non-Indo-European language like Thai, which is really helping me expand my ideas of how languages work. So that's what I did. There's a lot of other things that you can do with linguistics. One of the things that my professor always said, though, when I was in college, is that there is no job that is called linguist. You have to specialize in something, right? Like I learned TESOL, how to teach English. Other people specialize in phonetics or phonology, maybe sociolinguistics. You have to go into some field, and really a bachelor's degree in linguistics I don't think is going to be super useful for getting any job. There probably are some jobs out there that just require a bachelor's degree in linguistics, but normally you need to specialize in something. And I'm not super qualified to talk about all the job possibilities there are out there for linguists, but I will say everything we do is affected by language in some way, and even things that you wouldn't imagine. So for example, you talk to your phone, you say, "Hey Siri," and then you say whatever you want to say. All right, some linguist had to figure out what sound waves are being produced when you say a T sound and a D sound, and how they're different, and what sound waves are being produced when you make an R or an N or vowel sounds or all these different vowels, and how they're different from each other so that your phone can understand which sounds you're creating. And then after that, some linguists had to figure out how your phone is going to tell the difference between certain words once the order of your speech sounds that you've produced have been produced. And then once all those words have been produced, then some linguists had to figure out how your phone is going to decode those and make something meaningful out of them so that it can search the internet for the answer to whatever question you have. Some linguists had to figure out how to make Google Translate work, where you type or speak something into the English column, and then it translates those words using different syntax of different languages, and then outputs something in Spanish. There's plenty of jobs for linguists out there, especially now that computer translation and artificial intelligence are really starting to develop. I am going to go back to college and pursue further education in linguistics. Some of the areas that I am really interested in furthering my study are SLA, or second language acquisition, and there's an entire field studying how people learn second languages, as well as the field of first language acquisition, how children acquire languages and how they're different. You can see that there would be a huge market for those because adults are trying to learn languages and they want to know the best way to acquire new languages. So there's jobs in that field, as well as you want your child to acquire their first language in a healthy and natural way, right? And if your child is having trouble acquiring language, you're going to hire someone to help them, or you're going to try to find some solution to this problem. There are careers in that field. So I know I've kind of been rambling through some of my personal experiences, but hopefully it's interesting to you, especially if you are considering studying linguistics, or if that's something on your radar, or if it's something that you even want to just learn more about without formally studying in a university. Hopefully that's helpful and can give you some more food for thought. If you liked the video, I would really appreciate a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you guys in my next one.